Welcome, dear readers, to a journey through time, where mountains guard secrets and the human heart writes its most beautiful stories. Today we will immerse ourselves in a narrative that transports us to the winter of 1879, in a small town called Vinasque, where a storm will forever change the destiny of two lonely souls. This is a story about dignity, true love, and the courage to choose our own path, even when the entire world conspires against us. A story that teaches us that sometimes the greatest love is born not from words, but from shared silences. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What city, what state or country brought you here today? I love knowing where the hearts that connect with these stories come from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like if this journey touches your soul. Let's go together to discover where the true warmth of the human heart is born. 1879. Place. Vinasque, small town in the mountains. The wind howled like a soul in torment through the narrow streets of Vinasque, carrying snowflakes that danced in furious whirlwinds against the stone house windows. It was one of those winters that marked the memory of mountain dwellers, when even the oldest murmured ancient prayers asking for mercy from the heavens. In the Herrera store, the warmth from the burning firewood barely managed to ward off the cold that seeped through the cracks in the wooden boards. Esperanza organized the grain sacks with mechanical gestures, her fingers already numb despite her wool gloves. At 22 years old, she carried on her shoulders not only the weight of work, but also the invisible burden of the looks and whispers that followed her through the streets. An unmarried girl shouldn't be working like a man, Doña Carmen had murmured the previous morning, her words sharp as ice blades. It's a scandal, Don Patricio, allowing his daughter to behave this way. Don Patricio Herrera, a man with shoulders bent by work and years, pretended not to hear the comments. Since becoming widowed 5 years ago, Esperanza had become not only his daughter, but also his partner in commerce. The town could murmur whatever it wanted. He needed her, and she, in turn, found in work a refuge against the loneliness that corroded her soul like rust. The afternoon darkened prematurely when Don Aurelio Vega pushed open the store door, bringing with him the aroma of imported colognes and the arrogance of one who always got what he wanted. Tall, with a well-trimmed mustache and clothes that announced wealth, he greeted Don Patricio with the condescension of one doing a favor. Don Patricio, I came to collect the sugar order. I hope everything is in order for tomorrow's dinner. Esperanza kept her eyes down, arranging the merchandise with more effort than necessary. She knew that voice, those hands that once promised to hold her forever, those eyes that swore eternal love before departing in search of fortune, leaving only empty promises and a shattered heart. Of course, Don Aurelio. Esperanza, prepare the gentleman's order. She moved in silence, each gesture laden with wounded dignity that didn't go unnoticed by Aurelio's attentive eyes. When their hands briefly met as she handed over the package, he murmured only for her to hear, "You're still so beautiful, my dear Esperanza. Time has been generous with you." The blush that rose to her cheeks was not from pleasure, but from contained indignation. How dare he speak this way, as if nothing had happened, as if 3 years of silence could be erased with a honeyed phrase. "The order is complete, sir," she replied, her voice cold as the wind outside. When Aurelio left, the store seemed smaller, the air heavier. Don Patricio observed his daughter with tired eyes, seeing in her the reflection of his own resignation. "You don't need to carry the world on your shoulders, my daughter." "I'm not carrying the world, Papa. I'm just doing what needs to be done." But inside, Esperanza felt the weight of every judgmental look, of every poisonous whisper that painted her as a lost woman for daring to work, for daring to exist outside the narrow molds that the town had established for her. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging in her chest. When night completely swallowed the day and Don Patricio closed the store, Esperanza remained outside, letting the snowflakes kiss her face like frozen tears. She needed to walk, needed to feel something besides the suffocation of those 4 walls, something besides the looks that judged her without knowing her story. She walked through the deserted streets, her steps muffled by the snow that accumulated like a blanket of forgetfulness over Vinasque. The wind cut through her skin through her wool shawl, but she continued forward, climbing the path that led to the mountains, seeking in nature's solitude the comfort that men denied her. It was then that she stumbled. A stone hidden beneath the snow betrayed her step, and she fell down the steep slope, her cry lost in the wind's roar. Pain exploded in her ankle like red-hot iron, and when she tried to get up, she discovered she couldn't bear her body's weight. The snow continued falling, relentless, slowly covering her like a white shroud. The cold penetrated her bones, and a dangerous drowsiness began to take hold of her senses. This is how the mountain took the unwary, not with violence, but with a frozen embrace that numbed the soul before stealing life. It was when she saw the silhouette approaching through the snow curtain, a tall figure with broad shoulders, carrying a lantern that swayed like a lost star in the darkness. Diego Mendoza, the man from the cabin, the one the town spoke of in whispers, calling him a hermit, a lone wolf who avoided human contact. He knelt beside her without saying a word, his dark eyes evaluating the situation with the speed of one who knew well the mountain's dangers. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in his cape and carried her in his arms, his steps firm even on the treacherous terrain. "My ankle," she murmured through teeth chattering from cold. "I know. Stay still. You're going to be all right." His voice was deep, comforting as the warmth of a fireplace. Esperanza closed her eyes and let herself be carried, feeling for the first time in years the sensation of being safe, protected by arms that expected nothing in return. Diego's cabin emerged from the darkness like a beacon of hope. Simple, built with dark logs and mountain stones, it radiated warmth and welcome. He gently deposited her near the fireplace, where flames danced cheerfully, and began caring for her ankle with precise and delicate gestures. "It's just a sprain. It will hurt for a few days, but nothing is broken." Esperanza watched him work, noticing the large, calloused hands, but surprisingly gentle. There was something about this man that disarmed her defenses, a quietude that contrasted dramatically with the constant agitation of her life in town. "Why did you help me?" she asked when he finished bandaging her foot. Diego looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold stories as deep as wells. "Why wouldn't I help you?" The simplicity of the answer left her speechless. In the world she lived in, every action had a price. Every kindness hid an expectation. But there, in that cabin lost in the mountain, a stranger had saved her simply because it was the right thing to do. The storm raged throughout the night, keeping her prisoner in the cabin. Diego offered her his bed and slept on the floor near the fireplace like a silent guardian. When Esperanza woke the following morning, she found beside the bed a cup of hot tea and a slice of still warm bread. He accompanied her back to town when the snow stopped, walking in respectful silence beside her. But the looks that awaited them at the first houses were sharp as daggers, and Esperanza immediately knew that her life had just changed forever. Doña Virtudes, Vinasque's moral matriarch, waited at the store door with an expression that promised storms worse than the previous nights. "A decent girl doesn't spend the night in an unmarried man's house, Esperanza Herrera." Doña Virtudes' words resonated through the cold morning like funeral bell tolls. The 55-year-old woman, a respected widow and self-proclaimed guardian of the town's morals, stood planted in front of the store like an implacable judge, her black eyes shooting Esperanza with the fury of offended virtue. Don Patricio emerged from behind the counter with a face pale as the snow that still covered the rooftops. He had seen the whispers spread through the streets like fire in dry straw since Diego brought his daughter back. Now he faced Vinasque's most feared woman, one whose words could ruin reputations and destroy lives. "Doña Virtudes, my daughter was injured in the storm. Don Diego only saved her from freezing to death." "Save?" The woman's voice rose an octave, laden with disdain. "Don Patricio, you are very naive if you think others will see it that way. A girl who spends the night alone with a man is lost forever. Is that what you want for your daughter? For her to be pointed out as a fallen woman?" Esperanza remained silent, watching as her destiny was decided by people who barely knew her heart. She felt like a porcelain doll in the hands of careless children, fragile and at the mercy of others' wills. "There's only one way to save the girl's honor," continued Doña Virtudes, her voice taking on a prophetic tone. "She must marry the man, immediately." "Marry?" Don Patricio seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. "But Doña Virtudes, they barely know each other." "Exactly for that reason. If there was already intimacy, let the union be formalized before God and men. It's the only way she won't become the family's shame. Esperanza finally found her voice, which came out hoarse with indignation. I didn't have intimacy with anyone. Don Diego was a gentleman. He slept on the floor, away from me. My dear child, Doña Virtudes laughed bitterly. Do you think anyone will believe that? Do you think people care about the truth when scandal is much more interesting? Your reputation is already ruined. Now we must save what can still be saved. It was Don Aurelio Vega who appeared at the door at that moment, bringing with him his aura of sufficiency and the expensive aromas of his colognes. He had heard the rumors and came to confirm if they were true, with that morbid curiosity of those who delight in others' misfortunes. Is it true, then? Has our dear Esperanza gotten lost in the mountains? The way he pronounced the word lost made it clear he wasn't referring only to geography. Doña Virtudes turned toward him like a hawk spotting prey. Don Aurelio, you who are a man of position and influence, tell Don Patricio that there's no other solution besides marriage. Aurelio observed Esperanza with eyes that mixed disappointment and something she couldn't identify. Could it be relief? As if now he was free from any responsibility he once felt for her. Doña Virtudes is right, Don Patricio. A family's honor is like crystal. Once broken, it's never whole again. If Don Diego is a man of good character, he must assume his responsibility. What responsibility? Esperanza exploded, her patience finally exhausted. He saved my life. Where is your responsibility? You who judge me without knowing the truth. But her words were lost in the whirlwind of social conventions that had already decided her destiny. Don Patricio, broken by the weight of pressures and fear of seeing his daughter transformed into a social pariah, bowed his head in defeat. I'm going to speak with Don Diego, he murmured, and so it was. That same afternoon, Don Patricio climbed to the mountain cabin, carrying on his shoulders the weight of a decision that would tear his daughter's heart apart. He found Diego repairing a broken fence, his movements rhythmic and precise, like those of one who found refuge from turbulent thoughts in physical labor. Don Diego, we need to talk. The man straightened, wiping his hands on his leather apron. His dark eyes showed he already knew what was coming. Is it about last night? The town is talking. Doña Virtudes, well, she says there's only one way to resolve this with honor. Diego remained silent for a long moment, looking toward the mountains that rose majestically around his property. He knew well the unwritten laws of that society, the cruel rules that trampled lives in the name of morality. And what does your daughter say about that? Esperanza is a good girl. She'll do what's necessary to preserve the family's honor. That's not what I asked. Don Patricio sighed deeply. She's upset, but she understands there's no choice. Do you accept Esperanza as your wife? Diego looked again toward the mountains, where eagles flew free over the snowy peaks. He thought of the sad-eyed girl he had carried the night before, of the way she had winced with pain, not only from the ankle sprain, but from something much deeper that wounded her inside. If she accepts, I accept. 3 days later, in Vinasque's small stone church, the most melancholy wedding that town had ever witnessed took place. Esperanza wore her mother's simple party dress, hastily altered by trembling hands. There were no flowers, no cheerful music, only the solemn weight of a sacrament transformed into social obligation. Diego waited at the altar wearing his best suit, which smelled of lavender and mothballs. When Esperanza approached down the central aisle, he saw in her eyes not the brightness of a happy bride, but the resignation of someone who had accepted an imposed destiny. Father Miguel, a kind man who had known them both since childhood, conducted the ceremony with a sorrowful voice. He knew he was witnessing not the union of two hearts, but the sacrifice of two souls on the altar of social conventions. Do you, Diego Mendoza, take Esperanza Herrera as your lawful wife? I do. Do you, Esperanza Herrera, take Diego Mendoza as your lawful husband? A pause that seemed eternal. Esperanza looked at the man beside her, this stranger who would become her life companion by force of circumstances. She saw in his eyes not lust or satisfaction, but a sadness that reflected her own. I do. The rings were exchanged in silence, 2 circles of simple metal that sealed an agreement between prisoners of the same destiny. When Father Miguel declared them husband and wife, There was no kiss, only a look of mutual understanding. The party that followed was an exercise in pretense. Doña Virtude smiled satisfied for having saved the girl's honor. Don Patricio drank more wine than usual, trying to drown his guilt. Don Aurelio observed everything with a cynical smile, like one attending a theatrical performance of dubious quality. And Esperanza? Esperanza danced when necessary, smiled when expected of her, and died a little inside with each hypocritical compliment and each look of false understanding. When night finally fell and it was time to depart for her new life, she hugged her father with desperate force. "Forgive me, my daughter," he murmured in her ear. "Forgive this old fool who didn't know how to protect you better." "There's nothing to forgive, Papa. Just remember me as I was before." And so Esperanza Herrera became Esperanza Mendoza, not for love, but for necessity. She climbed to the mountain cabin beside a husband who was little more than a stranger, carrying a small suitcase and a shattered heart. The full moon illuminated the snowy path like a silent witness to one more human tragedy disguised as a happy ending. Diego Mendoza's cabin had only 3 rooms. The main room where the fireplace was, a small bedroom and a rustic kitchen. In the first days of marriage, Esperanza and Diego lived like ghosts inhabiting the same house, performing the basic gestures of survival without ever touching or conversing beyond what was strictly necessary. She would wake before dawn and prepare coffee in silence, leaving the cup on the table before retiring to the bedroom. Diego would drink the still hot coffee and leave to tend to external chores, repairing fences, cutting firewood, caring for the few chickens and the goat that provided them milk. When he returned for lunch, he would find the plate covered with a clean cloth, the food still warm, but no sign of Esperanza besides the traces of her careful presence. The nights were the most painful time. After the silent dinner, he would go to the bedroom to fetch blankets and pillows, making his improvised bed near the fireplace. Esperanza would remain in the kitchen, washing dishes with slow and meticulous movements, as if each plate were a prayer or penance. "You don't need to sleep on the floor," she had murmured on the 3rd night, without lifting her eyes from the pots she was scrubbing. "I'm used to it. I slept on the floor before you arrived. Before I arrived, you had your bed. Now it's yours." The implicit delicacy in those words touched something deep in Esperanza's heart, but she didn't know how to respond, how to thank a man who had sacrificed his own comfort to preserve her dignity, how to explain that she felt grateful and guilty in equal measure. It was on a thick fog afternoon, when the mountain disappeared behind grey curtains, that Esperanza found the letter. She was organizing Diego's few personal belongings. He had insisted she feel free to occupy all the house's spaces, when her fingers stumbled upon a yellowed envelope hidden between the pages of an old book. The careful handwriting was unmistakable, Don Aurelio Vega. The date showed the letter had been sent 3 years ago, shortly after his departure from Vinasque. With trembling hands, Esperanza opened the envelope, knowing she shouldn't, but unable to resist the need to understand. "My dear Esperanza, when you receive this letter, I will already be far away, pursuing dreams that call me beyond these mountains. I know I may seem cowardly in your eyes, but believe me when I say it's for love that I depart. You deserve more than this small town can offer. You deserve silks and jewels. You deserve dinners in golden halls and travels to distant lands. I'm going to seek all that for you, my beloved. I'm going to make fortune and return like a prince to find you. Wait for me. I promise that each day away from you will be torture, but it will be necessary torture to build the future we deserve. With all my love, Aurelio." Esperanza let the letter fall from her hands as if it burned. 3 years. 3 years she had waited for that letter that arrived addressed to Don Patricio, probably intercepted for some reason she would never know. 3 years looking toward the road every afternoon, imagining if she would see him emerge on the horizon with open arms and fulfilled promises. The tears came in waves, washing away not only the pain of betrayal, but also the last vestiges of illusions she still carried. Aurelio had returned, yes, but as a rich and powerful man who now saw her as something diminished, as a fallen woman not worth his redemption effort anymore. This is how Diego found her when he returned from the mountain, sitting on the floor of the room, surrounded by fragments of yellowed paper, crying with an intensity that seemed to spring from the depths of her soul. He asked nothing. He simply knelt beside her and began collecting the letter pieces, his movements careful like those of one handling something sacred and broken. "I shouldn't have read it," she sobbed. "It wasn't mine." "Maybe it was," he replied softly. "Maybe it arrived at the right time, though late." Esperanza lifted her red eyes to meet his, and for the first time since the wedding, she really saw him. She saw a man who didn't try to console her with lies or judge her for her pain. She saw someone who understood that sometimes it was necessary to mourn dead dreams before being able to move forward. "Why don't you hate me?" she asked. "Why don't you blame me for ruining your life?" Diego continued collecting the letter fragments, considering his words with the same care with which he chose wood for his sculptures. "Who said you ruined my life? You were forced to marry me. You lost your freedom, your solitude. Esperanza." The way he pronounced her name made her stop talking. "Do you think I was happy living alone here? Do you think a man chooses solitude because it nourishes him?" She studied him with curious eyes, noticing for the first time the lines of sadness that marked his face, the way his shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical work. "Why did you live alone?" But Diego was already getting up, the letter fragments gathered in his large hands. "I'm going to burn this in the fireplace. Some ghosts need to be exorcised by fire." Esperanza watched him walk to the fireplace and throw the paper pieces into the flames. For a moment, Aurelio's words danced among the fire tongues before transforming into ashes and smoke. She felt as if something heavy had been lifted from her chest, as if she could finally breathe after years of being suffocated by vain hopes. "Diego?" "Yes?" "Thank you." He didn't respond, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly. That night, for the first time since the wedding, Esperanza didn't immediately retire to the bedroom after dinner. She remained in the room, mending a torn shirt of his, while Diego carved a piece of wood near the fireplace. They didn't converse, but the silence that enveloped them was no longer uncomfortable. It was a silence full of possibilities, of nascent understandings, of two wounded human beings beginning to recognize in each other not an enemy, but a companion in misfortune. When she finally got up to sleep, Esperanza stopped at the bedroom door and turned toward him. "The bed is big enough for two," she said, her cheeks blushing intensely. "I mean, you could sleep on one side and I on the other, with pillows in the middle so you don't get cold." Diego lifted his eyes from his sculpture, and she saw something she couldn't identify pass across his face. Surprise, gratitude, maybe even a touch of tenderness. "Maybe," he replied. "Maybe it's time to stop sleeping on the floor." And so, with timid and cautious gestures, Esperanza and Diego took the first step toward something they didn't yet know if it could be called love, but which was certainly the beginning of true companionship. The first morning they woke sharing the same bed was wrapped in embarrassment and unexpected tenderness. Esperanza woke first, still in the darkness that precedes dawn, and for a moment didn't know where she was. The warmth beside her, the quiet breathing that wasn't hers, the sense of protection she had forgotten so long ago, all of it confused her until memory returned. Diego slept, turned toward the opposite side, respecting even in sleep the agreed distance between them. He had only removed his boots before lying down, remaining completely dressed like a respectful guest. Esperanza observed him in silence, noticing how sleep softened the hard lines of his face, how his dark hair spread disheveled across the pillow. There were scars on his hands. She could see one that ran from wrist to fingers on his left hand. Workers' hands of a man who knew both the delicacy of carving wood and the hardness of breaking stones. Hands that had carried her in the storm without expecting anything in return. She rose carefully not to wake him and walked to the bedroom's small window. Outside, morning mist rose from the valleys like white silk ghosts, and the mountains slowly emerged from darkness like giants awakening from deep sleep. "It's the most beautiful hour of the day." Diego's deep voice made her startle. He had awakened and was watching her from the bed, propped on one elbow, his dark eyes attentive to her every movement. "I didn't want to wake you," she murmured with her back to him, still contemplating the landscape. "I always wake early. It's an old habit." Esperanza turned slowly, gathering courage to ask the question that had intrigued her since she met him. "Why do you live alone here in the mountain, Diego? A man like you could have a different life in town with what? With a wife who chose me for love and not obligation." The bitterness in his voice made her approach, moved by an impulse she didn't fully understand. She sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining respectful distance, but allowing herself to study his face in the weak morning light. "That's not what I asked." Diego also sat up, running his hands through his disheveled hair. For a long moment, he remained silent, as if deciding whether she deserved to know the truth. "I had a family," he finally said, his voice low as a prayer. "My parents, my little sister, Carmen. We lived in a house in town, near the church. My father was a carpenter. My mother tended a garden that was famous for having Vinasque's best tomatoes." Esperanza felt something tighten in her chest. From the way he spoke, she already knew the story wouldn't have a happy ending. "What happened?" "It was 7 years ago. A fire during the night. It started in the neighbor's house and spread quickly. I was traveling, negotiating wood in the big city." His voice became even lower, laden with guilt that no time had managed to relieve. "When I returned, I found only ashes and 3 crosses in the cemetery." "My God," whispered Esperanza, her hand instinctively moving to touch his, but stopping halfway. "Carmen was only 8 years old. Golden hair like our mother's, laughter that sounded like church bells. She always waited for me at the window when I traveled, and always expected some candy from me." Diego stopped, swallowing with difficulty. "If I had been there, maybe—" "No." The word came out with more force than Esperanza intended. "Don't do that to yourself. If you had been there, you would have died with them. Maybe that would have been better." "Don't say that." Now she really touched his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with surprising firmness. "Don't ever say that again. Your family wouldn't want you to die of guilt for having survived." Diego looked at their intertwined hands, surprised by the intensity of her reaction. "How can you know that?" "Because I lost my mother when I was 17. Tuberculosis. I spent months believing that if I had been a better daughter, if I had prayed more, if I had taken better care of her, so until I realized I was dishonoring her memory with my guilt." They remained in silence, 2 wounded souls recognizing in each other's pain an echo of their own. Esperanza's hand still rested on his, and Diego made no movement to pull away. "Is that why you came to the mountain?" "I couldn't live in town anymore. Every street, every corner reminded me of them. I bought this land with money from the house insurance and built this cabin with my own hands. I thought that here, far from everything, the pain would diminish." "And did it diminish?" Diego laughed without humor. "Pain doesn't diminish, Esperanza. We just learn to carry it in a way that doesn't paralyze us completely." Esperanza then understood why Diego had treated her with such gentleness from the first moment. He knew pain, knew how it could break a person inside, even when the exterior remained intact. He had recognized in her a wounded soul because he possessed an equally injured one. "Thank you for telling me," she murmured. "Thank you for listening." The sun began to gild the distant mountains, painting the sky with tones of pink and orange. Esperanza got up to prepare the morning coffee, but before leaving the bedroom, Diego called her. "Esperanza?" "Yes?" "Your mother. What was she like?" A gentle smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile he had seen since they met. "She sang while cooking. She said food tasted better when seasoned with music, and she had the softest hands in the world. When I was sick, it was enough for her to pass her hand over my forehead for me to feel better. She would be proud of the woman you've become." Diego's words touched a place in her heart that had been wounded for so long that she had forgotten it existed. She blinked to contain tears and murmured an almost inaudible "thank you" before leaving toward the kitchen. While preparing coffee, Esperanza reflected on how strange life was. She had been forced to marry a man she barely knew, but was discovering that perhaps destiny, in its mysterious wisdom, had put her exactly where she needed to be. Not for love, not yet, but for something equally valuable: understanding. Diego appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later, already completely dressed and with his hair tamed. He accepted the cup of coffee she offered him, and for the first time since the wedding, they had morning coffee together, sitting at the small wooden table he himself had built. "I need to go to town today," she said after a while. "Papa asked me to help him with the store inventory." A shadow passed over Diego's face. They both knew that meant facing the looks, the whispers, all the burden of judgment that Vinasque kept for those who dared to live outside its narrow rules. "Do you want me to go with you?" The offer surprised her. "Would you do that?" "We're married, Esperanza. It's natural for me to accompany my wife when she goes to town." The word wife sounded different on his lips now, laden with a protective tenderness that warmed her heart like hot coffee warmed her hands. "I would like that," she admitted. "I would like that very much." And so, for the first time since the wedding, Esperanza and Diego went down to Vinasque together, not as strangers united by obligation, but as two human beings who had begun to build something precious on the ruins of their past pains. Trust. The town of Vinasque was buzzing with unusual excitement that April morning. An elegant carriage drawn by two bay horses had arrived during the early hours, and from it had descended Don Aurelio Vega, accompanied by two servants and enough trunks for a prolonged stay. The news had spread through the narrow streets like oil on dry cloth, and now the entire population whispered speculations about the reasons for his return. Esperanza learned of the arrival when she went down to the store to help Don Patricio, who had worsened from a persistent cough that had tormented him for weeks. Diego had accompanied her, as had become customary, carrying firewood to heat the environment and taking care of the heaviest work with the naturalness of one who had always been part of that routine. "Don Aurelio is staying at the Morales house," murmured Doña Carmen while choosing beans. "They say he came to stay for a season. Some talk that he's interested in buying land here in the region." Esperanza kept her eyes fixed on the account book she was organizing, but Diego noticed how her fingers tightened slightly over the pen. There was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't existed minutes before, and he recognized the signs of a soul preparing for battle. Don Patricio coughed violently, holding a handkerchief to his lips. When he pulled it away, Esperanza saw with alarm the red stains that spotted it. "Papa, you need to see a doctor." "It's nothing, my daughter, just a persistent cold." But Diego, who had lost his family to illnesses that began small, wasn't convinced. "Don Patricio, with your permission, I would like my wife to take you to Dr. Rodriguez today." The word wife still caused a small start in Esperanza whenever Diego pronounced it, but there was something in the protective way he referred to her that warmed her heart. "There's no need for so much alarm," protested Don Patricio, but another coughing fit left him without strength to argue. It was at that moment that the store door opened with a crash, and Don Aurelio Vega made his triumphal entrance. He wore a fine fabric suit cut in the capital, his shoes shone like mirrors, and he carried a golden-headed cane that looked more like a scepter of power. Behind him came Doña Virtudes, clearly satisfied to be in the company of the most prosperous man Vinasque had ever seen. "Don Patricio!" Aurelio's voice rang through the store like fanfare. What joy to reunite with old friends. And Esperanza. His eyes lingered on her with an intensity that made Diego instinctively move closer. "How radiant you look. Marriage has done you well." There was a tone in his voice that transformed the compliment into something almost insulting, as if he were surprised she had managed some kind of happiness after her fall. "Don Aurelio," she replied with controlled voice. "I heard you're back in town." "Temporarily, my dear. I have some business to handle here." His eyes turned toward Diego, evaluating him like livestock at market. "You must be the famous mountain hermit, Diego Mendoza, isn't it?" Diego inclined his head slightly, but offered neither his hand nor showed any deference. "Don Aurelio, I must say you were very lucky, my friend. Esperanza was always special." The way he pronounced the word special made Diego's blood boil, but he maintained a neutral expression. He had learned from years of solitude to control his emotions and wouldn't allow that man to provoke him. "I'm fully aware of the luck I had," he replied, his voice low but laden with meaning. Doña Virtudes, who was observing the interaction with eyes shining with malicious curiosity, decided to intervene. "Don Aurelio brought very interesting proposals for the town's development. Perhaps you'd like to hear." "Exactly." Aurelio struck his cane on the floor with studied enthusiasm. "I come with capital to invest, to bring progress to this region. Imagine only a modern sawmill, maybe even a train line connecting Vinasque with the capital." Don Patricio, despite his cough, showed genuine interest. "That would bring many job opportunities for our people." "Precisely. And I would like to begin by acquiring some strategic properties. Highlands with good views, where one could build enterprises that mark an era." Diego immediately understood where that conversation was heading. His mountain lands, with privileged views and abundant water, would be ideal for any large-scale enterprise. "Mountain lands are quite valued," said Esperanza, her voice taking on a challenging tone that surprised everyone, especially those with established houses. Aurelio laughed, a sound that tried to seem cheerful but carried contempt. "Ah, Esperanza, always so perceptive. It's true, I'm interested in your husband's lands. I would be willing to make a very generous offer." "They're not for sale," Diego responded without hesitation. "Not even for a price that would allow you to buy a beautiful house here in town? A more comfortable life, more suitable for a lady?" The veiled insult didn't go unnoticed by anyone present. Aurelio was suggesting that Diego couldn't offer Esperanza the kind of life she deserved, that he was an inadequate husband for a woman of her quality. "My husband offers me exactly the life I choose to have," said Esperanza, rising from behind the counter. "An honest life built with work and dignity. But my dear, you're still young. You don't need to settle for so little when you could have so much more." The implication was clear, and Diego felt a cold fury grow in his chest. Aurelio wasn't just offering money for his lands. He was suggesting that Esperanza deserved a better man, richer, more socially respected. "I think my wife was quite clear," said Diego, his voice low, but with an authority that made Aurelio step back. "Our lands aren't for sale, and our life is exactly as we want it to be." Doña Virtudes, sensing the growing tension, tried to calm. "Don Aurelio, perhaps it would be better to discuss business at another time." "No, Doña Virtudes. It's important that everything be clear from the beginning." Aurelio turned toward Esperanza with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Esperanza, you know I always wanted the best for you. If you ever change your mind about anything, you know my doors will always be open." The audacity of the proposal left everyone in shock. Aurelio was, in barely veiled terms, offering himself as an alternative to her marriage in front of her husband and witnesses. Esperanza approached Aurelio with a dignity that radiated from every pore of her skin. Her eyes, which once lowered shamefully before him, now faced him with a firmness that disconcerted him. "Don Aurelio," she said, her voice clear as mountain water, 3 years ago I waited for your promises. Today, looking at the man you've become, I thank God they were never fulfilled." The silence that followed was broken only by Don Patricio's cough. Aurelio paled, clearly not expecting such a public and definitive rejection. Doña Virtudes seemed to have swallowed her tongue, and Diego looked at his wife with an admiration he didn't try to hide. "You don't know what you're saying," stammered Aurelio. "The isolation, the difficult life, affected your judgment." "My judgment has never been clearer." Esperanza approached him, and her small but determined presence made him step back. "I learned the difference between a man who promises and a man who delivers, between someone who talks about love and someone who demonstrates it with actions." Diego felt something expand in his chest, a feeling of pride, and something deeper he didn't yet dare to name. Esperanza had chosen to defend them, with a courage that few men in Vinasque possessed. Aurelio, seeing he had lost that battle, tried to recover his composure. "Very well. But my offer for the lands remains open, Don Diego. When the reality of financial difficulties arrives, perhaps you'll reconsider." "There will be no reconsideration," said Diego, taking Esperanza's hand in his. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to take my wife home." And so hand in hand, Esperanza and Diego left the store, leaving behind a humiliated Aurelio and a speechless Doña Virtudes. The entire town would talk about that confrontation for weeks, but for the first time, the whispers would be of admiration for the young woman's courage, who had chosen true love over social convenience. As they climbed the path that led to the mountain, Diego finally stopped and turned toward Esperanza. "Why did you do that? Why did you defend me that way?" Esperanza looked at their intertwined hands, gathering courage to speak the truth that was growing in her heart. "Because I learned that home isn't where you're born, but where you choose to stay. And I chose to stay with you." And in that moment, walking hand in hand along the snowy path, something was born between them that was stronger than obligation, deeper than gratitude, truer than any promise Aurelio could have made. It was the beginning of love. The fabric store of Señora Morales was buzzing with morning activity, when Esperanza pushed the heavy door, making the entrance bell tinkle softly. She had decided to buy new wool to knit a sweater for Diego, a simple gesture that carried all the weight of her decision to truly invest in her marriage. The heated environment contrasted with the cutting cold of the May morning, and the aroma of new fabrics mixed with the lavender perfume that Señora Morales always scattered among her merchandise. Esperanza respectfully greeted the owner and began examining the yarn balls, looking for a shade of blue that would match Diego's eyes. It was when she heard Doña Virtude's unmistakable voice coming from the back of the store. Of course she defends her husband, poor thing. What choice does she have? But we all know that an educated woman like Esperanza is wasting her life in that lost cabin. True, agreed Doña Carmen, her voice laden with false compassion. A girl who could have had any man in town, even Don Aurelio when he returns, rich and prosperous. It's a sadness to see how destiny can be cruel. Esperanza felt her blood boil in her veins, but remained motionless behind the pile of fabrics, hearing every poisoned word. Don Aurelio is a true gentleman, sighed Doña Virtudes. He generously offered to help the girl rebuild her life, but she's blind from gratitude to the man who saved her. It's understandable, but tragic. They say he's still interested in her, murmured a third voice that Esperanza recognized as Doña Rosa's, that he would be willing to overlook the scandal and give her a dignified life. A dignified life, sighed Doña Carmen. Imagine only, an elegant house in the city, silk dresses, servants, everything a woman can dream of in exchange for that savage existence in the mountain. But she chose pride, declared Doña Virtudes with solemn voice. She preferred to publicly defend that man rather than recognize she made a mistake. It's typical of young women, stubborn to their own perdition. Esperanza had heard enough. With determined steps, she rounded the pile of fabrics and planted herself in front of the three women, who paled when they realized they had been overheard. "Excuse me," she said with crystalline voice, "but I couldn't help overhearing the conversation. I would like to clarify some misunderstandings." Doña Virtudes tried to regain composure. "Esperanza, dear child, we didn't mean to—" "Didn't mean what?" "Didn't mean to talk behind my back about my life. Didn't mean to decide what's best for me without consulting me." Esperanza's tone was calm, but there was a force in it that made the three women shrink slightly. "You talk about dignity," she continued. "But what dignity is there in whispering malicious gossip about a woman who isn't present to defend herself? What dignity is there in judging decisions you don't understand? My child," Doña Virtudes tried to assume her usual maternal tone, "we only worry about your well-being. You're young. You may not perceive the opportunities you're wasting." "Wasting?" Esperanza laughed, a clear sound that resonated through the store. "Let me tell you what really happened, since you seem so interested in my story." The women looked at each other nervously, but none dared to leave. 3 years ago, I loved a man who promised to return for me. I waited for him like a fool, rejecting other suitors, dreaming of a future that existed only in my imagination. When he finally returned, I discovered his promises were as empty as his character. Doña Carmen murmured something about Don Aurelio being a man of position, but Esperanza silenced her with a look. "Position? Yes, he has money, but do you know what he doesn't have? Loyalty, honesty, the ability to see value in a woman beyond her appearance or social status. When he saw me fallen, as you like to say, he offered me charity disguised as love." "But dear," Doña Rosa tried to intervene, "a rich man can offer security, comfort. And do you think I don't have that?" Esperanza's voice rose slightly. "Do you think I wake up cold because my husband doesn't warm me? That I go hungry because he doesn't feed me? That I live in fear because he doesn't protect me?" The women remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. "My husband carried me in the storm when I was injured and lost. Not because he expected reward, but because it was the right thing to do. He married me when society demanded it, without blaming me for a situation neither of us created. He sleeps on the floor to preserve my honor, works from dawn to dusk to provide for me, and never made me feel I was a burden or obligation." Esperanza took a step toward Doña Virtudes, her small but imposing presence. "Do you want to know what wasting life is? It's spending your days judging others' decisions because your own were too cowardly to make. It's defining a woman's value by her husband's money instead of the happiness she finds. It's preferring the bitterness of envy to the contentment of what you have. The store had become completely silent. Even Senora Morales had stopped folding fabrics to listen. Don Aurelio can offer silks and jewels, continued Esperanza, but he can't offer what I have with Diego. Respect, understanding, and the certainty that I'm loved for who I am, not for what I represent socially. But life in the mountain is so difficult, murmured Doña Carmen in a last appeal. Difficult? Esperanza smiled, and there was a light in her eyes that none of the women had seen before. Life is difficult when you live lies. When you marry for social obligation, and then spend years pretending contentment. When you accept being treated as an ornament instead of being valued as a person. She turned toward Senora Morales, who watched her with growing respect. Senora Morales, I need dark blue wool. I'm going to knit a sweater for my husband so he doesn't get cold on days he leaves early to cut firewood for our fireplace. Of course, dear child, replied the merchant, her eyes shining with approval. I have exactly what you need. While choosing the wool, Esperanza addressed the three women one last time who remained mute and ashamed. If you truly care about me, rejoice because I found a man who treats me as an equal, who respects me as a woman, and who loves me without trying to change me. That's worth more than all the silk dresses in the world. And with the dignity of a queen, Esperanza paid for her purchase and left the store, leaving behind three women who would never again underestimate the power of a woman who had discovered her own worth. News of the confrontation spread through Vinasque like fire in dry straw. That night, when Esperanza told Diego what had happened, he listened in silence, his dark eyes shining with an admiration she had never seen directed toward herself. You didn't need to defend me that way, he said softly. I wasn't just defending you, she replied, her hands busy with the knitting she had begun. I was defending us. Defending the right to be happy in our own way. Diego watched his wife work in the golden light of the fireplace, each movement of her hands laden with affection and purpose. In that moment he knew that what he felt for her had transcended gratitude, companionship, or even affection. He was in love with Esperanza Mendoza, the brave woman who had transformed a forced marriage into the most beautiful of choices. The month of June brought with it a humid heat that carried the heavy perfume of wildflowers, but also confirmation of Esperanza's worst fears. Don Patricio had worsened dramatically in recent weeks, his cough becoming more violent and his strength diminishing each day. Dr. Rodriguez, finally called to examine him, had confirmed with a grave shake of his head what everyone feared. The merchant's lungs were compromised, and there wasn't much medicine could do. Esperanza began dividing her time between the mountain cabin and the room above the store where her father was slowly consuming away. Diego accompanied her whenever he could, silently carrying the commerce responsibilities when Don Patricio could no longer leave his bed. One particularly hot morning, when the air seemed too thick to breathe, Don Patricio called Esperanza to sit beside his bed. His eyes, once lively and determined, were opaque from illness, but there was in them an urgency she immediately recognized. "My daughter," he began, his voice weak as a wind whisper, "I need to talk with you before it's too late." Esperanza took his hand in hers, feeling how the bones seemed fragile under the yellowed skin. "Don't talk like that, Papa. You're going to get better." "No, dear child. We both know I won't." He coughed slightly, then continued. "I have something to give you. It's in the table drawer under the store papers." With a heavy heart, Esperanza went to the table and searched among the commercial documents until she found an envelope sealed with her name written in her father's trembling calligraphy. She returned to the bed and opened it with trembling fingers. "My dear Esperanza, if you're reading this letter, it's because I finally had the courage to say what I should have said long ago. I failed you, my daughter. I failed in ways that deeply shame me. When your mother died, I should have been stronger. I should have protected you better from people's cruelty, should have defended you when they whispered behind your back. Instead, I let fear of social judgment guide my decisions. I forced you into a marriage I believed necessary to save your honor, but now I see you never needed saving. You were always stronger, more dignified, braver than any of us. It was I who needed saving from my own cowardice. Watching you with Diego these last weeks, I saw something that filled me with joy and remorse in equal measure. I saw a woman who found true love despite circumstances, not because of them. I saw my daughter flourish in a way my decisions almost prevented, The store is yours by right. Do with it what you judge best. If you want to sell it to build a different life with your husband, do so with my blessing. If you want to keep it, you know you'll be a better merchant than I ever was. But above all, forgive this old fool who confused society's rules with his beloved daughter's well-being. You always deserve to choose your own path, and I regret discovering that too late. With all my love and my repentance, your father who loves you more than life itself." Tears flowed freely down Esperanza's face when she finished reading. Don Patricio watched her with eyes that shone with tears of his own. "Papa," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Can you forgive me, my daughter?" Esperanza leaned over the bed and kissed her father's feverish forehead. "There's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought best at the time. And look at the result. You gave me Diego. You gave me a chance for love I would never have found alone. Diego is a good man. I saw how he looks at you, how he cares for you. That gives me peace. He's downstairs taking care of the store. Do you want to see him?" Don Patricio nodded weakly. Esperanza went downstairs and found Diego organizing merchandise with the meticulous care he applied to everything he did. When she told him about her father's request, he immediately went upstairs. "Don Patricio," said Diego, approaching the bed with respect. "Diego, my son," the dying man's voice gained momentary strength. "Thank you for caring for my daughter better than I ever managed. Thank you for showing me that true love is born from actions, not words. It was an honor, Don Patricio. Esperanza she is the best of me. Take good care of her, and let her take care of you too. My daughter has a heart too big not to have someone to love completely." Diego took the older man's hand with reverence. "I promise." Don Patricio closed his eyes, an expression of peace finally relaxing his tense features. "Now I can rest." 2 nights later, while Esperanza held his hand and Diego kept vigil in the chair beside them, Don Patricio Herrera departed in silence, carried away by dawn like a dry leaf by autumn wind. The funeral was a simple but moving ceremony. Half the town came to pay their last respects to the honest merchant who had served the community for so many years. Esperanza, dressed in black, remained beside Diego throughout the ceremony, finding strength in his solid presence by her side. Surprisingly, it was Don Aurelio who approached her after the burial. His expression was solemn, devoid of usual arrogance. "Esperanza, accept my condolences for your father's loss. He was a respectable man." "Thank you, Don Aurelio. If you need anything, if managing the store becomes too difficult, you know you can count on me." Before Esperanza could respond, Diego approached and gently placed his hand on her back, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "Very kind of you, Don Aurelio," said Diego with courteous politeness. "But my wife isn't alone. Whatever difficulties arise, we'll face them together." Aurelio studied them for a moment, and Esperanza had the impression he was finally seeing something that bothered him, a genuinely united couple who didn't need his help or interference. "Of course," he murmured, "of course." That night, back at the cabin, Esperanza and Diego sat in silence before the fireplace. She had read and reread her father's letter, and a strange sense of liberation filled her. It was as if the last chains that bound her to the past had finally been broken. "What do you want to do with the store?" Diego asked softly. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to keep it as a tribute to him. Another part wants to sell it and use the money to improve our life here. You don't need to decide now." Esperanza turned to look at him, this man who had become much more than a convenience husband. In the golden light of the fireplace, his features seemed sculpted by a sensitive artist, and his eyes carried a tenderness that warmed her heart more than the fire. "Diego?" "Yes? When my father said you take care of me better than he ever could, he was right. But you know you don't do it alone. I take care of you too." Diego extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. It was a simple gesture, but laden with all the promises they had never made in words. "We're a family," he said. "We are," she agreed. "Finally, we're a family." And that night, for the first time since they married, when they lay down in the bed they now shared naturally, there were no pillows between them. There were only 2 people who had found in each other not just companionship but a home. September arrived with a premature coldness that foretold a rigorous winter. Mornings dawned covered by thick fog that took hours to dissipate, and winds that descended from the mountains carried the presage of early snows. Esperanza had developed the habit of walking to the forest near the cabin every afternoon to collect wild fruits and medicinal herbs, an activity that brought her peace and connected her with the exuberant nature surrounding their new home. Diego always insisted on accompanying her on these expeditions, but that specific afternoon, he had received an unexpected visit from Don Miguel, a mountain neighbor who needed help repairing his cabin roof before the first snowfalls. Esperanza assured her husband she would only make a quick walk to the wild plum clearing and return before nightfall. "Don't go too far," Diego asked, an inexplicable worry tinging his voice. "And come back before it gets completely dark." "Don't worry," she laughed, lightly kissing his cheek in a gesture that had become natural between them. "I know these forests like the palm of my hand." Esperanza departed with a wicker basket and a thick wool shawl, humming softly a song her mother used to sing. The forest was particularly beautiful that late summer afternoon, with sun rays filtering through golden leaves and creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the ground covered with dry leaves. She reached the plum clearing and busied herself collecting the ripe fruits, delighting in their wild sweetness. Time passed without her noticing, and when she finally looked up, she noticed the sun was already hiding behind distant mountains, tinting the sky with orange and purple tones. It was when she was preparing to return that she heard the first howl. The sound resonated through the trees like a phantasmagorical lament, making the hair on her neck stand up. Esperanza immediately stopped, all her senses on alert. She knew well the mountain sounds, but that howl carried a hunger and ferocity that froze her blood. Soon, other howls joined the first, creating a sinister symphony that seemed to come from all directions. Wolves. Esperanza clutched the basket to her chest and began walking quickly toward the path that led back to the cabin, but her hurried steps only seemed to attract more attention from the predators. It was when she saw the first eyes shining among the trees. Two female wolves emerged from dense vegetation, their lean bodies and grayish fur indicating they had passed a difficult summer. Their ribs were visible under sparse hair, and desperate hunger shone in their yellow eyes. Soon other figures materialized in the growing twilight, a small but determined pack that had found a solitary and vulnerable prey. Esperanza knew that running would be a fatal mistake. Wolves were much faster than she in the forest, and sudden movement could unleash their hunting instinct. Instead, she began backing slowly toward a large tree, trying to maintain eye contact with the animals while searching for something she could use as a weapon. Her hand found a thick fallen branch at the tree's base. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The wolves approached in a semicircle, their movements coordinated with the precision of experienced hunters. Esperanza could hear their heavy breathing, see saliva dripping from their sharp fangs. "Diego," she whispered like a prayer, knowing he was too far away to hear her. The first wolf advanced, testing her defenses. Esperanza swung the branch forcefully, hitting the animal's snout and making it retreat with a whimper. But her victory was momentary. The attack had only enraged the other pack members. It was when they attacked together that Esperanza knew she was lost. There was no way to defend herself from multiple predators simultaneously. She closed her eyes and raised her arms to protect her face, preparing for the inevitable. But instead of feeling fangs sinking into her flesh, she heard a human roar that resonated through the forest like thunder. She opened her eyes to see Diego emerging from the trees like a force of nature, wielding an axe and shouting with primitive fury that made the wolves hesitate. "Get out of here," he roared, advancing on the animals without the slightest sign of fear. "Get out!" The wolves, surprised by the sudden appearance of a much larger and more dangerous opponent, retreated momentarily. But hunger spoke louder than prudence, and two of them turned toward Diego, while a third tried to circle around him to reach Esperanza. What followed was a desperate combat in the forest's semi-darkness. Diego handled the axe with deadly precision, but the wolves were fast and cunning. One of them managed to bite his leg, making him stumble, while another jumped toward his neck. "Diego!" Esperanza screamed, hitting the wolf attacking her husband with the branch she still held. The animal fell heavily and rose staggering, clearly stunned. Diego took advantage of the distraction to recover and deliver a sure blow with the axe handle to the head of the wolf that had bitten his leg. The animal collapsed unconscious. Seeing two of their companions neutralized, the remaining wolves finally lost courage. With frustrated howls, they disappeared into the forest darkness as quickly as they had appeared. The silence that followed was broken only by Diego's heavy breathing and Esperanza's sobs of relief. He dropped the axe and approached her, quickly examining her for wounds. "Are you hurt? Did they bite you?" "No, Diego, your leg!" Esperanza pointed to the blood trickling through his torn pants. "It's just a scratch," he lied, though the pain was considerable. "Let's get out of here before they return with reinforcements." Diego carried Esperanza in his arms the entire way back to the cabin, refusing to let her walk, even when she protested she was perfectly capable. Only when they reached the safety of their home did he allow her to tend to his wounds. The bite on his leg was more serious than he had admitted, and Esperanza worked in silence to clean and properly bandage it. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied the ointment, and Diego noticed how she struggled to contain tears. "Esperanza," he said softly, covering her hand with his. "Everything's all right. We're safe." "You could have died," she whispered, her voice choked. "You could have died because of me. And do you think I would allow anything to happen to you?" Esperanza lifted her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there left her breathless. There was an intensity in his gaze that went far beyond a husband's concern for his wife, far beyond a friend's affection. It was the look of a man who loved deeply and completely. "How did you know where I was?" she asked. "Don Miguel told me he had seen a small pack moving toward the forest this morning. When you didn't return at the agreed time..." Diego stopped, running his hand through his hair. "I never felt so much fear in my life. Diego, I can't lose you, Esperanza. I can't lose you too." The word too carried all the weight of his past losses, all the pain of one who had already faced the death of loved ones. Esperanza understood in that moment that Diego hadn't just risked his life to save her. He had faced his worst fears to protect her. Without thinking, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, full of gratitude and something deeper that was still being born between them. When they separated, both were breathing with difficulty. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for taking care of me, for what? For loving me," she said, finally admitting what their hearts had known for weeks. Diego gently drew her into his arms, and she let herself be embraced, finally feeling at home in a way she had never experienced before. There, in the safety of the embrace of the man who had risked everything for her, Esperanza knew she had found not just a husband, but her soulmate. "I love you too," he murmured in her hair. "More than I thought it possible to love someone again." And that night, while they cared for each other in the golden light of the fireplace, Esperanza and Diego finally allowed themselves to be truly husband and wife, not by obligation or social convention, but by their own choice and deep love. The wolf attack had been terrifying, but it had also removed the last barriers between their hearts. Sometimes Esperanza thought, before falling asleep in Diego's arms, it's necessary to face darkness to find light. September brought with it restless winds that seemed to carry poisonous whispers through Vinasque's streets. Esperanza had noticed how conversations ceased abruptly when she appeared in town, how looks quickly diverted when she tried to greet acquaintances. There was something different in the air, a tension she couldn't identify until Doña Carmen, in a rare demonstration of genuine concern, approached her at the church exit after Sunday Mass. "Esperanza, dear child," the older woman began, her eyes laden with uncomfortable compassion. "I need to tell you something that's being commented, for your own good." "What is it, Doña Carmen?" "Don Aurelio is spreading that you sought him out privately, that you said you were sorry about your marriage and asked for help to..." The woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "To free yourself from the situation you find yourself in." Esperanza felt her blood freeze in her veins. "That's a complete lie. I never said such a thing." "I know, dear, I know, but he has witnesses. He says you met at the old Morales house when you went to get your father's things. That you were crying, saying you felt trapped in a life you hadn't chosen. I was never alone with him at the Morales house." "Of course not, child, but you know how these stories take on a life of their own. He's being very convincing in his accounts." Esperanza immediately understood Aurelio's cruel play. Unable to accept his public rejection, he had decided to destroy her marriage by spreading lies that called into question her loyalty to Diego. And the worst was that, knowing her husband's reserved nature, she knew the rumors would find fertile ground in his own insecurities. "Does Diego know about these stories?" she asked, though she feared the answer. Doña Carmen lowered her eyes. "Don Miguel told him yesterday. He said it was his duty as a neighbor to alert him about what they're saying about his wife." Esperanza thanked the woman and quickly headed home, her heart beating accelerated with a mixture of rage and worry. She found Diego in the improvised workshop he had built at the back of the cabin, working on a wood sculpture, with movements more brusque than usual. "Diego," she began, "I need to talk with you about something they're saying in town." He didn't lift his eyes from his work. "I know what it's about." "Then you know they're complete lies." "Do I?" The simplicity of the question hit her like a slap. Diego finally stopped working and faced her, and Esperanza saw in his eyes the same pain he had carried when he told about his family's death, the pain of one preparing for another devastating loss. "How can you question my word?" she asked, her voice trembling with indignation. "I don't question your word. I question whether a woman like you can really be happy with a life like this." Diego gestured toward the simple cabin, toward the wild mountains around. "I question whether it isn't natural for you to prefer silks and comforts instead of this." "A woman like me?" Esperanza's voice rose dangerously. "What kind of woman do you think I am, Diego? An educated, refined woman who deserves much more than I can offer. And who told you that you have the right to decide what I deserve? Who told you that you can determine what makes me happy?" Diego stood up, dropping his tools. "Esperanza, you were forced to marry me. You never had a real choice. If now what? If now I invented a conversation with Aurelio that never happened? If now I pretended to be sorry about the best period of my life? Is that what you believe? I no longer know what to believe." The confession came out like a cry of pain. Diego turned his back to her, his shoulders tense with emotional strain. "Since Don Miguel told me I can't stop thinking, maybe you really deserve more. Maybe it's selfish of me to want to keep you here when you could have a better life." Esperanza observed him for a long moment, seeing not a man who doubted her, but a man who doubted himself. All the insecurities Diego carried since his family's death, all the years of solitude that had convinced him he didn't deserve happiness, were emerging like poorly healed wounds. "Diego," she said softly, approaching him from behind. "Look at me." He turned slowly, and she saw contained tears in his eyes. "Do you want to know the truth about what I feel regarding Aurelio? The truth about what I want from life?" He nodded silently. "Aurelio is a man who promises the world, but delivers only empty words. You are a man who promised only respect and delivered true love. He offered me riches I don't desire in exchange for a submission that would destroy my soul. You offered me a partnership that strengthens who I really am." Esperanza took his calloused hands in hers. "If I wanted a different life, do you think I would have publicly defended our marriage? Do you think I would have learned to knit to make clothes for you? That I would have transformed this cabin into a home? Esperanza, I'm not finished." Her voice gained strength. "Do you want to know why Aurelio is spreading those lies? Because he can't accept that a woman rejected him for a man he considers inferior. His pride can't bear the idea that I prefer true love to false gold." Diego studied her face, searching for signs of deception and finding only burning sincerity. "But if someday you change your mind—" "Diego Mendoza." Esperanza was genuinely irritated now. "If you mention that possibility one more time, I'm going to take your axe and cut down the tallest tree on this mountain just to prove I'm more stubborn than you." Despite the tension, a reluctant smile touched Diego's lips. "You would do that." "I would. And then I'd use the wood to build a fence around this property with a giant sign saying, 'Here lives Esperanza Mendoza, who chose this man and this life by her own will.'" Diego laughed, a low, warm sound she had learned to love. "I think all of Vinasque would know about the sign." "Perfect. Maybe then they'll stop inventing stories." They remained silent for a few moments, and then Diego asked, "How could I doubt you?" "Because you've been hurt so many times you forgot how to accept happiness without suspecting it," Esperanza replied tenderly. "But I'm not going to give up on you, Diego. Not because of rumors, not because of your insecurities, not because of anything. And I don't deserve you." "Nonsense. You deserve all the happiness in the world, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." That afternoon, a sudden storm hit the mountain, bringing heavy rain and winds that made the cabin tremble. During the storm, Part of the roof began to leak, creating drips in several points of the room. "We're going to have to fix that before it gets worse," said Diego, observing the water trickling across the floor. "Then let's fix it," replied Esperanza, rolling up her sleeves. They worked side by side for hours, she holding the boards while he nailed them, both soaked by the rain that entered through the openings. It was hard and uncomfortable work, but there was something deeply satisfying about facing the problem together. When they finally finished, they were completely wet and exhausted, but the roof was repaired. They sat on the room floor, observing the leaks that had ceased, and began to laugh, first softly, then with guffaws that resonated through the cabin. "Look at us," said Esperanza, observing their soaked clothes and Diego's disheveled hair. "We look like two castaways." "The happiest castaways in the world," he replied, drawing her into his arms. And there, sitting on the floor of their humble house they had repaired together, wet and tired but united, Esperanza and Diego rediscovered the strength of their love. Aurelio's lies seemed small and insignificant before the solid reality of what they had built together. That night, while they warmed themselves before the fireplace, Esperanza said, "Do you know what I learned today?" "What?" "That true love isn't just about beautiful moments. It's about choosing to be together even when things get difficult. It's about working side by side to fix leaks, literal and metaphorical ones." Diego kissed her still damp hair. "And do you still want to fix leaks with me for the rest of your life?" "Especially the leaks," she laughed. "They make victories sweeter." And so what had begun as an almost destructive crisis transformed into an even stronger reaffirmation of their mutual commitment. Aurelio's rumors would continue for some time, but would never again find fertile ground in Diego's heart. He had learned finally to trust in the happiness he had found. October painted the mountains with all the colors of autumn, transforming the landscape into a living tapestry of golds, reds, and oranges that spread across the slopes like brushstrokes from a celestial artist. For Esperanza, this beauty perfectly reflected her heart's state. Something new and vibrant was blooming in her life, something that transcended gratitude or companionship and transformed into deep and true passion. It had been a particularly busy morning in town. Don Aurelio, frustrated by his rumor's failure to destroy Esperanza's marriage, had attempted a more direct approach. He had found her in the central plaza, when she was leaving the pharmacy with medicines for Doña Elena's growing arthritis, an elderly mountain neighbor. "Esperanza," he called her, his voice laden with theatrical urgency. "I need to speak with you." She turned, tired of his constant attempts to interfere in her life. "Don Aurelio, I've already said everything I had to say." "No, you don't understand. I have information about your husband. Things you should know before it's too late." "What kind of information?" Aurelio looked around dramatically, as if checking if they were being observed. "Did you know he was married before? That he had a wife who didn't die in the fire as he tells?" Esperanza felt her blood freeze for a moment, not because of the lie's implications, but because of Aurelio's audacity in inventing something so cruel. "That's a despicable lie." "It's the truth. She abandoned him because she couldn't stand living isolated in the mountain. She fled with another man to the capital. Diego invented the fire story to hide the shame of abandonment." Esperanza looked at Aurelio with a mixture of pity and disgust. The lie was so gross, so desperate, that even some people passing through the plaza stopped to observe the scene with discomfort. "Don Aurelio," she said with crystalline voice that could be heard to the most distant houses, "are you so consumed by envy that you've reached the point of slandering the dead? My husband's family died in a fire that half the town witnessed. Father Miguel celebrated their funeral masses. Their crosses are in the cemetery for anyone who wants to verify." A murmur of reprobation began to spread among those present. Aurelio had crossed all bounds of decency, and even his most faithful supporters began to distance themselves from him. "You don't understand," he insisted, but his voice no longer carried the same conviction. "I just want to protect you from..." "From what? From happiness? From true love? From dignity?" Esperanza took a step toward him, and her small but determined presence made the man step back. "Or do you want to protect me from having chosen a better man than you?" The silence in the plaza was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped to hear the words that resonated like church bells. "I'm going to say this one last time, in front of everyone who wants to hear," continued Esperanza, her voice growing in intensity. I am Esperanza Mendoza by my own choice. I love my husband, not despite our simple life, but because of the purity and truth it represents. I prefer 1,000 times to sleep in a cabin with a man who respects me than in a palace with someone who treats me like a trophy. Doña Virtudes, who had approached attracted by the commotion, tried to intervene. Esperanza, dear, perhaps it would be better not to wash dirty laundry in public. Dirty laundry? Esperanza turned toward the matriarch with flaming eyes. The only dirty thing here are the lies you insist on spreading about my life. I'm proud of what I built with Diego. Proud to be his wife. Proud to have chosen substance instead of appearance. Aurelio, seeing he had definitively lost any opportunity to influence public opinion, attempted one last move. You're going to regret this, Esperanza. When winter comes, when poverty tightens, when you realize what you lost. What I lost? Esperanza laughed, a sound clear as mountain water. Did I lose the opportunity to become a bitter woman married to a man who buys affection with money? Did I lose the opportunity to live a golden lie? If that's lost, then I thank God for it. And with the dignity of a queen, Esperanza walked away from the plaza, leaving behind a humiliated Aurelio and a crowd that finally understood the true measure of both their characters. When she arrived home, she found Diego in the workshop, working on a sculpture that made her stop at the door, breathless. It was a family, a man, a woman, and 2 small children, carved in cherry wood with a delicacy that transformed each line into a declaration of love. It's beautiful, she whispered. Diego lifted his eyes, immediately noticing the tension in her face. What happened in town? Esperanza told him about the encounter with Aurelio, about the cruel lies he had tried to spread. Diego listened in silence, his hands continuing to work on the sculpture with precise and calm movements. And what did you tell him? He asked when she finished. The truth, that I chose you, that I chose our life, that I don't regret anything. Diego stopped working and faced her. Even when our life is more difficult? Even when I can't give you everything other men could? Esperanza approached and took the chisel from his hand, setting it aside. Diego, look at this sculpture. Look at this family you created with your own hands. Do you see poverty here? I see wealth. I see love, hope, future. She delicately touched the woman figure in the sculpture. Is this me? It's how you look when you truly smile, he admitted. When you're happy. And these children? Diego hesitated, his cheeks blushing slightly. They're dreams. Hopes that maybe it's foolish to have. Or maybe they're promises, she murmured, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of the small figures. Maybe they're proof that you not only survived your losses, but learned to dream again. In that moment, something changed in the air between them. It was as if all the unspoken words, all the carefully guarded feelings, finally found voice. Esperanza, said Diego, his voice hoarse with emotion, I love you. Not from gratitude, not from convenience, but with every fiber of my being. You brought light to a life I thought was destined for darkness. And you taught me that true love isn't thunder and lightning, she replied, softly touching his face. It's gentle rain that nourishes the earth day after day. It's silent work that builds something lasting. When they kissed, it was with the passion of 2 hearts that finally allowed themselves to love without reservations, without fear, without regrets. It was the kiss of 2 people who had chosen each other not once but 1,000 times, through every difficulty, every doubt, every moment of shared tenderness. That night, they wrote letters, not to send, but to keep, declarations of love that one day their children could read, testimonies of how 2 wounded hearts healed each other through the courage to trust again. Esperanza wrote, Tomorrow I may not remember what life was like before you, but I know it was only existence. With you I learned what it is to live. Diego wrote, You took the broken pieces of me and didn't try to glue them back together. Instead, you created something new and beautiful with them. That's called a miracle. While autumn gilded the leaves outside, Esperanza and Diego finally gave themselves completely to each other, knowing they had found not just love, but their destiny. Winter arrived earlier than expected in that year of 1879. bringing with it heavy snows that isolated the cabin for entire weeks. For many in Vinasque, the season's rigor would be a trial, but for Esperanza and Diego, it became a disguised blessing, a period of intimacy and discoveries that definitively welded their souls. During the long frozen days, they developed rituals that became sacred. In the morning, Diego lit the fireplace while Esperanza prepared aromatic coffee that warmed more than fire. In the afternoon, she knitted or mended clothes while he sculpted, both working in comfortable silence near the window to take advantage of the scarce light. In the evenings, they read aloud books borrowed from Father Miguel's personal library or simply talked about dreams and memories in the golden light of flames. It was during one of those afternoons that Esperanza made a discovery that would change their lives forever. She had been feeling strange in recent weeks, a different fatigue, a sensitivity to smells that hadn't bothered her before, a tenderness in her breasts that she attributed to the cold. But when she realized her menstruation was late, a joyful and terrifying suspicion began to grow in her heart. "Diego," she said one night of particularly intense snow, when the wind made the cabin groan like a ship in a storm. He lifted his eyes from the book he was reading, noticing something different in her voice's tone. "Do you remember the sculpture you made? The family with 2 children?" "I remember." "Why?" Esperanza took a deep breath, gathering courage for words that would transform their lives. "Maybe it's not just a dream." Diego looked at her without understanding for a moment, then comprehension slowly illuminated his features. The book slipped from his hands and fell to the floor with a dull sound. Are we going to—" "I think so," she whispered, tears already flowing down her cheeks. "I don't have absolute certainty yet, but all the signs—" Diego rose so quickly that the chair almost tipped over. In 2 steps he was beside her, kneeling and taking her hands in his. "A baby," he murmured, as if testing the sound of the words. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly seized by doubt. "I know we didn't plan." The answer came in the form of a kiss so tender and full of reverence that she knew without a shadow of doubt that he was more than happy. He was overflowing with joy. "Happy isn't a big enough word," he said against her lips. I'm being reborn. You gave me back not just the ability to love, but the courage to dream about the future." That night, lying embraced under wool blankets, they made plans, whispering like children, conspiring mischief. They talked about names, about how to expand the cabin, about how to raise a child in the mountains far from town prejudices. "Will it be a boy or girl?" asked Diego, his hand resting reverently on Esperanza's still flat belly. "It doesn't matter. It will be perfect because it will be ours. What if it's a girl who inherits your stubbornness? What if it's a boy who inherits your kindness? It will be loved either way," he concluded. "Loved as I love you, without conditions, without reservations, forever." But January's winds brought more than snow. One frozen morning, Don Miguel appeared at the cabin door, panting from the difficult walk through snow piles. He brought news that would make Esperanza question everything she believed about forgiveness and redemption. "Don Aurelio is very ill," he announced after accepting a cup of hot coffee. "Pneumonia. Dr. Rodriguez has no hope he'll survive." Esperanza felt something strange move in her chest, not joy at the misfortune of the man who had tried to destroy her happiness, but an inexplicable sadness for a life wasted on bitterness and vain ambition. "He asked to see you," continued Don Miguel. "He said he needs to ask forgiveness before dying." Diego frowned. "Esperanza has no obligation to attend to his whims, even in his dying hour." "I know," said Don Miguel softly. "But sometimes, forgiving is more for us than for the person who hurt us." Esperanza looked out the window toward the snow-covered mountains, thinking about the new life growing in her womb, about the happiness she had found despite all obstacles. Maybe it was time to definitively close that chapter of her life. "I'm going to go," she decided. The Morales house was suffocatingly hot when they arrived, the air heavy with medicinal herb vapors and the sweet, nauseating smell of illness. Aurelio lay in an improvised bed in the main room, his formerly haughty face now gaunt and yellowed by fever. When he saw Esperanza, his eyes filled with tears. "You came," he murmured, his voice weak as a whisper of dry leaves. "I came," she confirmed, approaching the bed with Diego at her side. "I need to ask forgiveness for everything, for the lies, for the attempts to destroy your happiness, for the way I treated you when we were young." Esperanza studied him. This man who had once occupied so much space in her dreams, and who was now just a bitter shadow of himself. "Why, Aurelio? Why could you never leave me in peace?" "Because," he coughed violently before continuing, "because you were the only good thing in my life and I lost you through my own greed. When I returned and saw you had found happiness without me, I couldn't bear that it was possible to be happy without money, without status, just with love. And now I see you chose well, that he," Aurelio looked at Diego, "is the man I was never capable of being. Humble, loyal, generous. You deserved someone like that from the beginning." Esperanza felt tears pull at her eyes, not for Aurelio but for the tragedy of a life spent pursuing empty things at the expense of truly valuable ones. "I forgive you," she said simply, "not for you, but for me, so I can move forward without carrying this bitterness." Aurelio closed his eyes, an expression of peace finally relaxing his tense features. "Thank you. Be happy. You deserve all the happiness in the world." 3 days later, Don Aurelio Vega died in his sleep. His funeral was well attended, but Esperanza noticed the tears were more from social obligation than genuine sadness. He had lived richly, but died poor in genuine affection. That night, back in the safety of their cabin, Esperanza said to Diego, "Do you know what I learned today?" "What?" "That wealth isn't what you have, but what you're willing to give." Aurelio had everything, but never learned to give true love. We have little, but we give everything to each other. Diego kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. "And now we have even more to give," he said, his hand finding her belly where their child was growing. "Yes," she agreed. "Now we have a future to give to the world." And while snow continued falling outside, covering the world with a mantle of purity, Esperanza and Diego prepared to bring a new life into the light, a life that would be raised in love, in truth, and in the certainty that the most valuable things in existence cannot be bought or sold, only cultivated with patience and care. The spring of 1880 arrived like an explosion of life to Vinasque's mountains. Snow melted in musical streams that sang down the slopes, the first wildflowers dotted the fields with vibrant colors, and the air carried the sweet perfume of renewal that made hearts expand with joy. For Esperanza, now 6 months pregnant, the season perfectly reflected the miracle happening in her body. Her rounded belly housed a life that moved ever more vigorously, small fists and feet that manifested invisible undulations under her skin. Diego had become even more protective and attentive, anticipating her needs before she even expressed them. "You need to rest more," he insisted one golden May morning, when he found her in the garden they had planted together, removing weeds among the tomato sprouts. "I'm pregnant, not sick," she laughed, but accepted the hand he offered to help her up. "Besides, our child needs to learn early that good food comes from honest work." "Our son or daughter will have plenty of time to learn that," Diego replied, but there was so much love in his voice that it removed any severity from the words. They had spent the winter months expanding the cabin, adding a small but cozy room that would be the nursery. Diego had built a polished wooden crib that was a miniature work of art, every detail carefully carved with symbols of protection and love. Esperanza had sewn tiny clothes with soft fabrics she bought with the small income that still came from her father's store. Their relationship with the town had subtly changed after Aurelio's death. It was as if his departure had taken with it the malice that poisoned whispers, leaving only respectful curiosity about how the young mountain couple lived. Doña Virtudes, notably, had lost much of her influence after publicly supporting Aurelio's lies, and other gentler voices began to be heard. It was Doña Carmen who appeared one June afternoon, carrying a basket of gifts for the baby that was coming. "My dear Esperanza," she said, warmly embracing the young pregnant woman, "I brought some little things left over from when my grandchildren were small. I hope you'll accept them." The basket contained baby clothes, carefully washed and ironed, soft blankets, and even some wooden toys carved by local artisans. Esperanza was moved by the generosity. "Doña Carmen, this is very generous." "Nonsense, dear. A baby is a blessing for the entire community." "And may I say?" The older woman lowered her voice conspiratorially. Half the town is betting whether it will be a boy or girl. Don Miguel says that, by the way you're carrying, it will be a girl. Doña Rosa insists it will be a boy, because you're more beautiful than ever. Esperanza laughed. And what do you think? I think it will be perfect, regardless of sex. A child raised with so much love can only bring joy to the world. When Doña Carmen left, Diego commented, "It seems we're finally being accepted as part of the community." Or maybe, suggested Esperanza, caressing her belly, it's our baby who's integrating us. It's hard to maintain prejudices against a growing family. Summer brought not only heat and abundance, but also an unexpected letter. It arrived through Don Miguel's hands, who had received it from a traveler from the capital. It was addressed to Señora Esperanza Mendoza, in unknown but elegant handwriting. Esperanza opened the envelope with curiosity and discovered it came from a young woman named Isabella, daughter of a prosperous family, who had heard of her story through mutual acquaintances. Dear Señora Mendoza, I apologize for the liberty of writing to someone I don't know personally, but your story reached me through friends who recently visited Vinasque. I am a 20-year-old young woman who finds herself in a situation similar to what you faced. My parents want to force me into a marriage of convenience with a man I consider despicable, claiming it's for my well-being and the family honor. Your courage in defending your right to choose your own happiness inspired me deeply. If it's not too bold, could you tell me how you found strength to resist social pressures? How did you know you were making the right decision? With deep admiration, Isabella Rodriguez de Santos. Esperanza read the letter twice, feeling something warm expand in her chest. Her story, which had begun as a source of shame and malicious whispers, was now inspiring other women to fight for their autonomy. "What is it?" asked Diego, noticing her thoughtful expression. She showed him the letter, and he read it in silence, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It seems you've become an inspiration," he commented. "We've become an inspiration," she corrected. "Our story proves that true love can flourish even in the most improbable circumstances." That night, Esperanza wrote a long response to Isabella, telling not only about her journey, but about what she had learned along the way. Dear Isabella, courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that some things are more important than fear. When I chose to stay with Diego, it wasn't because I was certain everything would work out, but because I knew I would be unable to live with myself if I didn't try. True love isn't just about passion or romance. It's about mutual respect, shared growth, and the willingness to build something lasting together. If you don't see those qualities in the man they want to impose on you, then you're right to resist. Remember, you own your own life. No one has the right to decide your destiny for you, not even with the best intentions. The happiness you build with your own hands will always be more solid than any comfort offered by others. Be brave, but also be wise. Find people who support you, who see your true value, and never forget that you deserve to be loved for who you are, not for what you represent socially. With affection and hope, Esperanza Mendoza. When she finished writing, Esperanza felt deep satisfaction. Her struggle hadn't been in vain if it could help even one person find courage to choose their own happiness. "Do you know what I hope for our child?" she said to Diego while sealing the letter. "What? That they grow up knowing they have the right to choose their own path in life, that they understand true love is a right, not a privilege, that they have courage to defend their convictions even when the entire world conspires against them." Diego approached and kissed her hair. "With a mother like you, I'm certain our child will learn all that and much more." And while stars shone over the silent mountains, Esperanza felt the baby move vigorously in her womb, as if agreeing with the parents' words. In a few months, they would bring into the world a new life created in true love, a child who would be free to write their own story of happiness. September of 1880 arrived with an urgency that Esperanza felt in every fiber of her being. Her belly had grown so much that Diego insisted on helping her with even the simplest tasks, his eyes always vigilant for any sign that the moment had arrived. The irregular contractions that had visited her for weeks became more frequent and intense, and both knew their child was eager to meet the world. It was a golden autumn morning when Esperanza woke with a different pain, a low, constant pressure that made her sit up abruptly in bed. Diego, who had developed the light sleep of one awaiting signals, immediately woke up. "Is it now?" he asked, already getting up. "I think so," she replied, breathing deeply through a stronger contraction. "Diego, I'm scared." He knelt beside the bed and took her hands in his. "I'm scared too. But we're going to face this together, like we've faced everything else." It had been agreed that Doña Carmen, who had assisted in several births in town, would come to help Esperanza when the time came. Diego ran down the still dark dawn path to find her, leaving Esperanza alone for the first time in months. She used that time to walk slowly through the cabin, touching the things they had built together. The carefully polished crib, the tiny clothes folded in the drawer, the rocking chair Diego had made especially for her to nurse the baby. Each object told the story of their love, their hopes, their shared future. When Diego returned with Doña Carmen and her medicinal herbs, Esperanza was already in active labor. The older woman took command of the situation with the efficiency of one who had seen dozens of babies come into the world. "Everything is progressing normally," she announced after examining Esperanza. "The baby is well positioned. Now it's a matter of patience." Patience. It was something Esperanza had learned to value in those months of marriage. Patience to let love grow naturally, to build trust brick by brick, to allow two lives to intertwine at the right rhythm. The hours that followed were a mixture of intense pain and anticipated joy. Diego remained beside Esperanza throughout the entire process, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, wiping sweat from her forehead with fresh cloths. In certain moments, she clung to him with desperate force, and he received her with the stability of a mountain. "I can't," she panted during a particularly strong contraction. "You can," he said firmly. "You're the strongest woman I know. If you manage to make me believe in love again, you can bring our child into the world." It was when the sun began to set, painting the sky gold and red, that Doña Carmen announced, "I can see the head. A few more contractions, and your baby will be here." Esperanza gathered all the strength she had left, and with a final effort that seemed to come from some deep place in her soul, brought her child into the world. The first cry that resonated through the cabin was the most beautiful sound Diego had ever heard. It was new life, materialized hope, love made flesh and bone. "It's a girl," announced Doña Carmen, lifting the small but perfect creature. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Esperanza collapsed into the pillows, exhausted but radiant. Diego looked at the daughter Doña Carmen was carefully cleaning, and tears of joy flowed freely down his cheeks. "A girl," he murmured, amazed. "Our girl." When Doña Carmen placed the baby in Esperanza's arms, the world stopped for a moment. The creature had dark hair like her father's, and eyes that promised to have the depth of her mother's. She was perfect in a way that transcended simple biology. She was the physical result of a love that had triumphed over all adversities. "Hello, my little one," whispered Esperanza, delicately touching her daughter's face. "I'm your mama, and this is your papa. We waited so long for you." Diego sat carefully on the edge of the bed, extending a finger that the baby immediately grasped with surprising strength. "She already knows she belongs to us," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "What are we going to call her?" asked Esperanza. They had discussed names for months, but now, looking at their daughter's perfect little face, they immediately knew. "Alba," said Diego, "like dawn, because she's the beginning of a new life for us." "Alba Mendoza," repeated Esperanza, testing how it sounded. "It's perfect." Doña Carmen, who had finished organizing everything, approached with a maternal smile. "She's one of the most beautiful girls I've ever helped birth. And can you see, she's already looking around, curious about the world. She'll be an intelligent girl." On that first night with Alba, none of the three slept much. Esperanza and Diego took turns holding the baby, marveled by every small sound, every movement, every breath. It was as if they were in a trance, hypnotized by the reality that they had created a new life between them. "Do you know what amazes me most?" said Esperanza during one of the nighttime feedings, watching Alba suckle with fierce determination. "What?" "That our entire story, the storm, the forced marriage, the difficulties, even Aurelio, everything led to this moment. If anything had been different, Alba wouldn't exist." Diego contemplated that profound truth. "Then maybe destiny knew what it was doing even when we didn't." "Or maybe," suggested Esperanza, "true love always finds a way to flourish, even in the most improbable circumstances. When dawn finally came, bringing with it the golden light that had given their daughter her name, Esperanza and Diego were sitting together in bed, Alba sleeping peacefully between them. They were no longer just husband and wife. They were a family. "What do you think the future holds for her?" asked Diego, gently caressing his daughter's silky hair. "Everything," replied Esperanza with conviction. "She'll grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally. She'll know she has the right to choose her own path. And most importantly, she'll know it's possible to find true happiness, even when the entire world says it's impossible." And while Alba slept safely between the parents who loved her more than life itself, Vinasque's mountains bathed in the golden light of dawn, witnessing the birth not just of a girl, but of a new generation created in true love. 7 years passed like golden pages of a well-loved book, each one laden with precious memories and constant growth. The spring of 1887 found the Mendoza family prosperous in a way that transcended any material measure, rich in love, abundant in joy, full of realized dreams. Alba had grown into a vivacious 6-year-old girl, with her mother's wavy dark hair and her father's deep, gentle eyes. She ran through the mountains with the freedom of one born wild, spoke to animals as if they were old friends, and already showed signs of the perceptive intelligence and generous heart she had inherited from both parents. Beside her, playing in the soft grass that grew in front of the expanded cabin, was her younger brother Gabriel, 3 years old, who had inherited his mother's radiant smile and his father's contemplative serenity. He was a quieter child than Alba, preferring to observe the world with large, curious eyes before deciding how to interact with it. Esperanza, now 29, had blossomed into a woman of mature beauty and unshakable confidence. Work in the mountains had strengthened her body, but it was love and motherhood that had truly sculpted her soul into a more beautiful form. She watched her children play while hanging clothes on the line Diego had built between 2 sturdy trees. Diego, at 35, had become not only a devoted husband and father, but also a respected artisan whose fame had spread beyond Vinasque. His wood sculptures were sought after by families from various neighboring cities, and the additional income had allowed them to expand the cabin even more, adding a proper workshop and even a small stable for the horses they now raised. "Mama!" Alba ran to Esperanza, her hair flying like freedom flags. "Can I go with Papa to get firewood today?" "You can, my flower," replied Esperanza, kissing her daughter's forehead. "But put on your coat. The morning wind is still cold." "And me, Mama." Gabriel tugged at his mother's skirt with small but insistent hands. "Can I go too?" "You can help Mama prepare lunch for when Papa and Alba return," said Esperanza, lifting the boy in her arms. "How about we make that bread you like?" The smile that illuminated Gabriel's face was answer enough. Diego emerged from the workshop carrying his axe and rope to tie the firewood. Constant physical work had kept him strong and muscular, but it was the years of happiness that had truly sculpted his appearance. There was a light in his eyes that didn't exist in the solitary man Esperanza had found in the storm. "Ready for our expedition, Senora Alba?" he asked with exaggerated formality, making his daughter laugh. "Ready as can be, Senor Papa," she replied, imitating his tone. Esperanza watched them depart up the path, Alba skipping beside Diego like a young colt, and Gabriel waved energetically until they disappeared among the trees. It was such a perfect picture of contentment that for a moment she had to stop just to absorb the magnitude of her happiness. Later that morning, while helping Gabriel knead the bread dough, Esperanza heard the familiar sound of horse hooves approaching. Through the window, she saw an elegant carriage climbing the path, an unusual sight in their mountains. The carriage stopped in front of the cabin, and from it descended a young woman elegantly dressed, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man. Esperanza wiped her hands on her apron and went out to receive them, Gabriel hiding shyly behind her skirts. "Senora Mendoza?" The young woman approached with a nervous but determined smile. "I'm Isabella Rodriguez de Santos. I wrote to you some years ago." Esperanza's eyes widened in recognition. "Isabella, what a wonderful surprise. Please, come in." "This is my husband, Eduardo," Isabella introduced, indicating the man beside her. "We were traveling through the region and couldn't resist the opportunity to meet you personally." They sat in the cabin's main room, which Esperanza and Diego had furnished with simple but beautiful pieces, most made by his skilled hands. Isabella looked around with genuine admiration. "It's exactly as I imagine," she murmured. "A true home." "Tell me," said Esperanza, serving tea in porcelain cups she had inherited from her mother, "what happened after our correspondence?" Isabella smiled, taking Eduardo's hand. "I followed your advice. I rejected the marriage my parents wanted to impose and fled to an aunt's house who always supported me. There I met Eduardo, who was the family's lawyer. He saw me for what I really was, not for what I represented socially." Eduardo, a man with gentle eyes and a shy smile, added, "Isabella taught me that true love cannot be bought or forced. It has to grow naturally, based on mutual respect and admiration." "And your parents?" asked Esperanza. "Initially they were furious," admitted Isabella, "but when they saw how Eduardo treated me, how happy we were together, they ended up accepting. Sometimes time is the best healer for wounded pride." It was at that moment that Diego and Alba returned, loaded with firewood and laughter. Alba immediately ran toward the visitors with children's natural curiosity, while Diego approached with his characteristic courtesy. After introductions, Isabella told how she had heard about the Mendoza family's life through travelers and merchants. "Your story became an inspiring legend for many young women facing similar pressures. You can't imagine how many letters I received from friends asking me to tell again how the woman of the mountains chose true love over social convenience." Esperanza was surprised. "We had no idea." "You became symbols," said Eduardo, "living proof that it's possible to build authentic happiness when you have the courage to choose with your heart." While they talked, Alba and Gabriel played around the adults, their laughter resonating through the house like music. Isabella watched them with shining eyes. "We're also expecting a baby," she confided to Esperanza, "and when this child is born, I want them to grow up hearing stories about brave people like you." At the end of the afternoon, when the visitors were preparing to leave, Isabella embraced Esperanza for a long time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me it's worth fighting for happiness, for proving that true love isn't just a fairy tale fantasy." When the carriage disappeared down the path, Esperanza remained at the cabin door, reflecting on the visit. Diego approached and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Do you know what this means?" he said. "Our story is helping other people find courage." "It's strange to think about that," she murmured, leaning back against his chest. "When I married you, I thought my life had ended. In reality, it was just beginning." That night, after the children fell asleep in their cozy rooms, Esperanza and Diego sat before the fireplace, as they did every night for 7 years. But today there was something different in the air, a sense of completeness, of a closed circle. "Diego," she said, "do you remember the first night we spent together, when you found me in the storm? How could I forget? It was the night my life changed forever. You said you saved me, but now I realize we saved each other." Diego took her hand, observing the simple ring that still shone on her finger after all those years. "Do you know what I learned? That true love isn't lightning that falls from the sky. It's like a seed that needs to be planted, watered every day, cared for with patience, and protected from storms," added Esperanza, remembering all the difficulties they had faced. "Storms are important too," said Diego. "They test whether the roots are deep enough." Alba appeared at the bedroom door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "I can't sleep. Can I stay here with you?" "Of course, my flower," said Esperanza, opening her arms. Alba curled up between her parents, and soon Gabriel also appeared, following his sister's example. There, before the crackling fireplace, the Mendoza family gathered in a collective embrace that summarized everything they had built together. "Papa," murmured Alba, "tell that story." "Which story, my princess?" "The one about the knight who saved the princess in the storm." Diego and Esperanza exchanged an amused look. Over the years, the story of how they met had transformed into a family legend, told and retold with small magical variations. "Once upon a time," began Diego with theatrical voice, "in a land of high mountains and wild winds, there was a brave princess who got lost in a terrible storm." But while he told the familiar story, Esperanza thought about the deeper truth behind the fantasy. It hadn't been a knight who saved her, nor was she a helpless princess. They were two wounded people who had found healing in each other, two broken hearts that had united to form something stronger than the sum of their parts. When the children finally fell asleep in their parents' arms, Diego carried them back to their rooms. Esperanza remained alone for a few moments before the fireplace, watching the flames dance in the embers. She took paper and ink and began to write. Not a letter, but a record for her children to read when they were older. My dear Alba and Gabriel, when you read this, perhaps you'll be adults with families of your own. I want you to know you were born from the purest love two human beings can share. Your father and I didn't marry for overwhelming passion or fairy tale romance. We married by obligation, forced by circumstances. But we chose every day to transform that obligation into devotion, that necessity into desire, that arrangement into true love. Love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice, day after day. It's work, it's patience, it's forgiveness, it's mutual growth. When you reach the age to choose your own companions, remember, look for someone who respects you for who you are, who supports you in your dreams, who is willing to grow alongside you. Look for someone who prefers to build something lasting instead of something just beautiful. And never forget, you are living proof that true love can flourish even in the most improbable circumstances. You are our greatest work of art, our most precious legacy. With all our love, Mama and Papa. Diego returned and found her writing. What is it? A letter to the future, she said, showing him the paper, so they always know where they came from. Diego read the words in silence, then looked at the woman who had transformed his life from survival into celebration. Do you know where true warmth is born, Esperanza? Where? Not in the fireplace, not in the sun, not in any external fire. He gently touched her chest, over her heart. It's born here, in the love we choose to cultivate, in the family we choose to protect, in the happiness we choose to build. Esperanza covered his hand with hers. And it spreads, she murmured. To our children, to people like Isabella, to everyone who needs to believe that true love is possible. Then our story continues, said Diego, even when we're no longer here to tell it. That night, as they lay in their familiar bed, hearing the soft sounds of their children sleeping in the rooms beside them, Esperanza thought about all the paths they could have taken, all the different decisions they could have made. But she wouldn't change anything. Not the storm that brought them together, not the forced marriage that united them, not the difficulties that strengthened them. Everything had been necessary to reach this perfect moment of absolute contentment. Diego, she whispered in the darkness. Yes, I love you. Not because I had to marry you, but because I choose to love you again each day that dawns. And I choose to love you, he replied, not just for the woman you are, but for the family we built, for the life we created, for the future we still have ahead. And there in the silent mountains of Vinasque, where the wind carried stories of love through the snowy peaks, Esperanza and Diego Mendoza fell asleep in peace, knowing they had found what most people spend their entire lives searching for. A love that grows stronger with time, a happiness that multiplies when shared, and the absolute certainty that, even in the fiercest storms, there's always a place where warmth is born, in the heart of two people who chose to truly love.